Jonathan Roumie stood on the weathered wooden dock by Sullivan Lake, clutching a garish orange notice, his eyes narrowing in disbelief at the words before him. The Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association had just delivered an ultimatum: remove his grandfather's old fishing boat from the lake, his family's lake, within 48 hours, or face a $500 a day fine. They even threatened to tow it at his expense. Jonathan let out a sharp laugh, but it wasn't born of amusement. The audacity, the sheer nerve of these people, writing with such smug authority, made his blood simmer. They thought they could dictate what he did on his own property, but what hit him harder was the secret he uncovered moments later for years. They'd been using his lake for lavish fishing tournaments without so much as a nod of permission. And now, they were plotting something far bigger, a scheme that could steal his family's legacy forever. Jonathan Roumie, known to millions as Jesus in The Chosen, wasn't here as the actor who brought scripture to life or the voice behind Hallow's prayers. Today, he was just a 50-year-old man standing on his family's dock, fighting to protect the legacy his grandfather, an Egyptian immigrant, had left behind. Sullivan Lake, a 50-acre gem surrounded by forests and meadows, was purchased by his grandfather in the 1950s. The old man called it nature's jewel, a place to fish, unwind, and teach local kids to cherish the land. As a boy, Jonathan spent summers on that rickety aluminum boat, listening to his grandfather's tales of hard times and his battles to shield the lake from greedy companies. "This lake isn't just water, Jonathan," he'd say, his voice warm but firm. "It's life itself. Don't let anyone take it from you." Now, as Jonathan stared at the HOA's letter, signed by William Carter, their self-important president, he felt his grandfather's eyes on him, waiting to see what he'd do. The letter's tone was as if they owned the world. "Your boat does not meet community aesthetic standards." It read, "Remove it immediately, or face consequences. Ridiculous Sullivan Lake belonged to his family. Documented in deeds dating back over 70 years. What gave them the right to issue orders and aesthetic standards? That 16-foot aluminum boat, weathered but sturdy, was his grandfather's pride, carrying memories of Jonathan's childhood. It wasn't just a boat, it was history, the heart of Sullivan Lake." 6 months ago, Jonathan had walked away from Hollywood after years of filming The Chosen, recording for Hallow, and chasing a relentless schedule. He was burned out. The fame, the pressure, the spotlight. It was thrilling but draining. He needed a place to recharge, to fish, to find himself again. Sullivan Lake, with its simple cabin built by his grandfather, was the perfect refuge. Jonathan had renovated the place, keeping its rustic charm with a corner for books and a rack for fishing rods. Each morning, he'd carry a mug of coffee to the dock, cast a line, and let the sound of water lapping against the boat soothe his soul. It was where he felt closest to his grandfather, to those boyhood days learning to bait a hook and listen to stories. But that peace didn't last. That morning, as Jonathan tied up his boat, he spotted the orange notice taped to its side with waterproof tape. "Violation notice." It screamed in bold letters. The contents were even more absurd. His boat was inconsistent with community aesthetic guidelines and had to be removed from community waters. They demanded it be registered with the HOA and display community stickers. Jonathan shook his head, thinking it was a prank. But back at the cabin, he found an official letter in his mailbox, complete with HOA letterhead and William Carter's signature. This was no joke. Jonathan called Henry Walsh, his closest neighbor and a friend of his grandfather. Henry, a 75-year-old retired carpenter with sun-baked skin and calloused hands, lived half a mile down the shore in a house he'd built himself, blunt and allergic to nonsense. Henry chuckled dryly over the phone. "Morning, Jonathan. Looks like the HOA vultures finally sniffed you out." Jonathan told him about the notice and letter. Henry sighed. They've been getting bolder every year. Ever since they built that fancy estate 10 years ago, they act like they own everything within 5 miles. Your grandfather would have chased them off with a shotgun loaded with rock salt. The image of his grandfather wielding a shotgun made Jonathan grin. The old man, a fierce immigrant, was known for dealing swiftly with trespassers. Henry went on. They tried to bully me once about my boat shed being unsightly. I told William Carter where to shove his notice. But here's the kicker: they've been using your lake for their fancy fishing tournaments for years. Call themselves the Elite Anglers Club or some pompous nonsense. Bunch of weekend warriors in overpriced gear who couldn't catch a minnow. The news stunned Jonathan. He hadn't considered that anyone would dare use the lake while the cabin sat empty for a few years. He'd assumed private property still meant something. After hanging up, Jonathan went online and found the Maple Creek Estates HOA website. There, in full color, were photos of their lakeside fishing derby. Showing men in expensive gear proudly holding fish caught in his lake, the Elite Anglers Club had its own page, boasting exclusive access to prime fishing waters. Pictures showed large gatherings on the lake's east shore, clearly his land, with tents, barbecues, and a temporary dock they'd set up. A recent post announced their biggest tournament yet, set for the following weekend, with a $5,000 prize and a catered lakeside barbecue. They were planning a massive event on his property without asking. Jonathan could hardly believe it. For at least 5 years, they'd exploited the lake's vacancy to assert control. One post even called Sullivan Lake our community's crown jewel, as if they had any claim to it. Needing advice, Jonathan called Laura Bennett, a college friend, now an environmental lawyer specializing in land and water rights. Laura, with her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude, always understood why Jonathan left Hollywood for peace. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "You own the lake, deeds and all, and they're telling you to remove your boat," Jonathan confirmed, and Laura laughed. "This is straight-up trespassing. They've got no legal ground. What's your next move?" Jonathan paused, thinking. He wasn't one for rash decisions. "Let's gather evidence first," he said. "If they've been doing this for years, we need to document everything before they cover their tracks." Laura agreed. "Don't respond to their notice yet. I'll come up this weekend to check your deeds. Meanwhile, set up security cameras around the lake, and don't let them touch your boat if they take it. That's theft." Jonathan smiled. Laura always made a fight feel like a chess game. That day, Jonathan installed wireless security cameras around the lake, focusing on the east shore where the HOA held their events. The cameras were high resolution, with night vision and motion sensors that would alert his phone if anyone came near. He also dug through his father's old filing cabinet, finding the original deeds to Sullivan Lake clear, unambiguous ownership of the water and 15 feet of land beyond the high water mark. A 2010 survey map, commissioned by his father, confirmed the boundaries. Everything was airtight. As Jonathan reviewed the documents, an email arrived from the HOA inviting him to a community meeting. It was a mass email, not addressed to him specifically, but his curiosity was piqued. He wanted to see William Carter and the HOA board in action, to size up the people who thought they could claim his lake. The meeting took place at the Maple Creek Estates Community Center, a gaudy building with columns and a fountain out front. Jonathan slipped into the back row, observing about 30 residents, most looking like they'd rather be elsewhere. William Carter, a man in his mid-50s with slick silver hair and a navy blazer with gold buttons, ran the meeting like a small-town dictator. He droned on about lawn height rules and approved mailbox designs before addressing the lake. "We've had reports of an unauthorized boat on community waters," Carter announced, irritation in his voice. "All watercraft must be registered with the HOA and comply with aesthetic guidelines. The lake is our community's prized asset, and we must maintain its pristine appearance. Jonathan sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. He raised his hand, catching Carter off guard. "Could you clarify something?" Jonathan asked, his tone calm but pointed. "When you say community waters, what do you mean, who owns the lake?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Carter's smile tightened. "The lake is a community resource, managed by the HOA since this development was established." He tried to brush it off, but Jonathan pressed. "So, does the HOA have a deed to the lake, or is it county-owned with an HOA management agreement?" A few residents perked up, an older man nodding thoughtfully. Carter gripped the podium, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "There are historical arrangements," he snapped. "The specifics aren't relevant here. But rest assured, the HOA has full authority to regulate lake activities." Jonathan kept his expression neutral. "Interesting. I'd love to see those documents sometime, just out of curiosity." Carter quickly moved to the next topic, but his glance at Jonathan betrayed unease. After the meeting, a man approached Jonathan, introducing himself as Thomas Reed, president of the Elite Anglers Club. In his 60s, with a weathered face and a confident handshake, Reed wore an expensive fishing vest and a club-logoed cap. "Haven't seen you before," he said, sizing Jonathan up. New to the neighborhood, Jonathan explained he'd moved into his family's lake property. Reed's eyebrows shot up. The old Sullivan place, been empty for years. "We thought it was abandoned." Jonathan smiled, but his guard was up. Not abandoned, still very much Sullivan property. Reed nodded, a calculating glint in his eye. "Welcome to the area. Our fishing club is exclusive, but I could get you in. We've got the best spots on the lake." Jonathan nearly laughed at the irony being offered access to his own lake. He thanked Reed and agreed to check out their tournament, already planning to gather more evidence of their trespassing. As Jonathan prepared to leave, he overheard Carter whispering to Reed and a woman named Margaret Lane, the HOA vice president, near the refreshment table. Pretending to sip lukewarm coffee, Jonathan caught fragments of their talk. "We need to speed up the timeline," Carter hissed. "Deal with this Sullivan situation before it's too late." Margaret glanced at Jonathan, and they lowered their voices, moving away. Jonathan's heart raced. What were they planning, and why were they so rattled by his presence? Driving home, Jonathan called Laura again. "They're hiding something," he said, recounting the meeting and Carter's hushed conversation. Laura agreed. "Carter dodging your question about ownership is telling. And that timeline. Sounds like a bigger scheme. Get ready, Jonathan. This is about to get wild." As Jonathan pulled into his driveway, he knew one thing for certain: the fight was just beginning. But he wasn't the type to back down, not after all he'd been through. And definitely not when his grandfather's legacy was at stake. Jonathan Roumie drove back to the cabin, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just heard at the HOA meeting. William Carter's evasive answers, the hushed conversation with Thomas Reed and Margaret Lane, and the audacity of the HOA's claim over his lake, it all pointed to something bigger than a petty dispute over his grandfather's boat. The lake, shimmering under the late afternoon sun, seemed to beckon him to act, to protect what his grandfather had fought so hard to preserve. Jonathan wasn't one to rush into a fight, but he wasn't about to let these people trample over his family's legacy. As he stepped out of his truck, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The boat was gone. In its place, taped to the dock, was another orange violation notice, this one stating that his boat had been impounded for non-compliance and could be reclaimed only after paying a $750 fine and signing a compliance agreement. If not claimed within 30 days, it would be sold at auction. Jonathan's hands tightened into fists. They hadn't just threatened him, they'd stolen his grandfather's boat. Fury coursed through him, but Jonathan took a deep breath. remembering his grandfather's words. When you're angry, that's when you need to think clearest. He wasn't just fighting for a boat. This was about standing up to bullies who'd been exploiting his family's property for years. He pulled out his phone and called Laura Bennett again, filling her in on the meeting and the missing boat. They took it. Laura's voice crackled with indignation. That's theft, plain and simple. We need to move fast. I'm driving up tomorrow morning with every legal tool I've got. In the meantime, check your cameras, see if they caught anything, and call the sheriff. This isn't just a civil matter. It's a crime. Jonathan followed her advice, starting with the sheriff's office, the deputy on the line. A weary-sounding man named Officer Daniels seemed hesitant. HOA disputes can get messy, he said, his tone suggesting he'd rather stay out of it. You might want to work this out directly with them, Jonathan pressed, explaining that the lake was his private property and the boat was stolen, but Daniels brushed it off. Sounds like a misunderstanding. I'd suggest talking to their board first. The call left Jonathan frustrated, wondering if the HOA had friends in the sheriff's department or if they'd simply convinced local law enforcement they had authority they didn't. Either way, he wasn't getting help there, not yet. Next. Jonathan checked the security cameras he'd installed around the lake. The footage was gold. One camera, positioned near the east shore, had captured two men in HOA-branded vests, towing his boat away in broad daylight. Their truck marked with the Maple Creek Estates logo. Another clip showed a group of anglers launching boats from his property, clearly unaware they were trespassing. The evidence was mounting, and Jonathan felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just going to get his boat back, he was going to expose the HOA's lies and make them regret ever stepping foot on his land. When Laura arrived the next morning, she brought a stack of legal files and a thermos of strong coffee. They spread out on the cabin's dining table, poring over the Sullivan family's deeds and survey maps. Laura's eyes gleamed as she examined the documents. These are bulletproof, she said, tapping the deeds. Your grandfather was meticulous. The lake, the water rights, the surrounding land, it's all yours. No question. The HOA's been lying to their own residents. She'd also pulled county records before driving up, and what she found was explosive. The original Maple Creek Estates development plans explicitly stated that Sullivan Lake was private property, not part of their jurisdiction. They've been trespassing for years, Laura said, her voice sharp with excitement. And they've been charging residents HOA fees for lake maintenance they had no right to manage. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, processing it all. So they've been pocketing money for something they don't own. Laura nodded. Exactly. And I bet those fees didn't go to cleaning the lake. We need to find out where that money's been going. The camera footage added fuel to their case, showing clear evidence of trespassing and theft. But Laura had a hunch there was more to the story. This isn't just about fishing tournaments, she said. That timeline you overheard, I'd bet my law degree they're planning something big, something that needs control of the lake. Their suspicions were confirmed that afternoon when Henry Walsh stopped by, his pickup truck rattling into the driveway. Henry's niece, Emily, worked at the county planning department, and she'd called him with a bombshell. Emily saw an application cross her desk, Henry said, his weathered face grim. Maple Creek Estates is pushing for a major expansion, a luxury lakeside resort with condos, a marina, and a golf course. Guess which lake they're eyeing? Jonathan's jaw tightened. It all made sense now. William Carter and his cronies weren't just petty tyrants. They were scheming to turn Sullivan Lake into a multi-million-dollar development, banking on the assumption that the Sullivan family had forgotten about the property or would sell it cheap. Jonathan's return had thrown a wrench in their plans. Laura's eyes lit up. This is huge. They've been setting this up for years, probably convincing residents and investors they control the lake. We need to dig deeper into this resort plan, who's funding it, who's involved. But first, we need to play smart. She suggested a subtle approach: draft a letter to the HOA requesting all documents related to lake ownership and the Elite Anglers Club's activities. The letter would be polite, framed as a reasonable inquiry, not a direct challenge. This puts them on notice that someone's asking questions, Laura explained, without tipping our hand about the development. Jonathan agreed, liking the idea of keeping them guessing. They also decided to let the upcoming fishing tournament go ahead as planned, with the cameras rolling to capture every moment of trespassing. The more evidence they had, the stronger their case when they finally confronted the HOA. In the meantime, Jonathan received a letter from Stephen Hayes, the HOA's attorney, reiterating the demand to comply with community regulations and threatening legal action if he interfered with their operations. The letter was vague, full of buzzwords like historical precedent, but lacking any specific legal basis for their authority over the lake. Laura smirked as she read it. This is a bluff. If they had real documentation, they'd cite it. They're nervous. Jonathan also reached out to Claire Morgan, a local reporter Henry recommended. Claire had written stories about HOA overreach in the past and was known for sniffing out corruption. They met at a small diner outside town, far enough from Maple Creek Estates to avoid prying eyes. Claire, in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a notebook always at the ready, listened intently as Jonathan explained the situation. So they've been using your lake for years without permission and now want your boat gone, she summarized. Scribbling notes. That's classic HOA nonsense. But there's more here, isn't there? Jonathan nodded, mentioning the resort rumors. Claire's pen paused. I've heard whispers about a big development, but no one would go on record. If they're planning to build on private property without consent, that's a front-page story. Jonathan asked her to hold off publishing until they had more evidence, but to keep digging into the resort plans and potential investors. The day before the tournament, William Carter showed up at Jonathan's door unannounced. Jonathan was reviewing camera footage, a mug of coffee in hand, when the doorbell rang. Carter, dressed in a casual button-down instead of his usual blazer, wore a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Roumie, I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said, his tone overly friendly. I understand you're upset about the boat. I'm sure we can work something out. Jonathan invited him in, curious to hear his pitch. Carter made a show of admiring the cabin, commenting on its rustic charm with thinly veiled condescension. The HOA is willing to make an exception for your boat, he continued, settling onto the sofa. You can keep it on the lake. No problem. All we ask is you sign this agreement acknowledging our management role over lake activities. Carter handed Jonathan a document that essentially asked him to recognize the HOA's authority over Sullivan Lake in exchange for keeping his boat. It was so blatant, it almost made Jonathan laugh. Instead, he played along, his tone innocent. And the fishing tournament tomorrow, would this cover that too? Carter's eyes narrowed. You know about that? Jonathan shrugged. Thomas Reed invited me to check it out. Sounds like a big deal. Carter nodded slowly, his expression guarded. It's a community tradition, been going on for years. Jonathan flipped through the document, pretending to consider it. And this resort I've heard about, the one planned for the lakeshore, would this agreement cover that? Carter couldn't hide his surprise. I'm not sure what you've heard, but any development would go through proper channels. This is just about lake usage. His body language screamed tension, his hands fidgeting. Jonathan handed the document back. I'll need my lawyer to review this. She's very interested in the lake's legal status. Carter's smile faltered. I'm trying to be reasonable. Mr. Roumie, it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this amicably. There are economic opportunities that could benefit you if you cooperate. The implied bribe hung in the air. Jonathan kept his face neutral. I'll think about it, Mr. Carter. In the meantime, I'd like my boat back. Carter stood, clearly displeased. I'll see what I can do. But cooperation goes both ways. The HOA has strong community support. It'd be a shame for this to become a prolonged dispute. After Carter left, Jonathan called Laura. He practically admitted they have no claim. He said, and he hinted at cutting me in on the development deal. Laura wasn't surprised. Classic tactic: intimidate first, then dangle a carrot. Tomorrow's tournament is our chance to nail them. Let it play out. Get every second on camera. Jonathan looked out at the lake, now calm under the evening sky. He thought of his grandfather, casting a line from that old boat, teaching him to stand firm. Whatever Carter and his cronies were planning, Jonathan was ready to fight not just for his lake, but for the truth. Jonathan Roumie stood on his cabin's deck, binoculars in hand, watching the east shore of Sullivan Lake come alive with activity. The morning of the Elite Anglers Club's fishing tournament had arrived, and the scene was a chaotic display of entitlement. Trucks towing sleek boats rolled onto his property, their tires churning up the grass. Men in expensive fishing gear set up tents, tables, and a temporary bar, while a massive banner proclaimed 15th Annual Elite Anglers Championship with the Maple Creek Estates logo in bold. Jonathan counted at least 20 vehicles and 15 boats already, with more arriving by the minute. His security cameras, discreetly positioned around the lake, were capturing every second of this brazen trespass. Laura Bennett, who'd arrived just after dawn, stood beside him, her camera with a telephoto lens at the ready. "They're not even pretending to respect boundaries," she said, shaking her head. "This is our gold mine." Jonathan nodded, his jaw tight. The audacity of the HOA, led by William Carter, was staggering, but he and Laura had a plan: let the tournament unfold. Document everything and use the evidence to bury the HOA's lies. The cameras would record the trespassing, and Laura's legal groundwork, bolstered by the ironclad deeds and county records, would ensure their case was airtight. But what Jonathan saw next made his blood run cold. William Carter arrived, not in his usual blazer, but in a crisp polo shirt, escorting a group of well-dressed men and women carrying portfolios. They weren't fishermen. Their tailored suits and purposeful strides screamed money. Carter gestured toward the shoreline, pointing out spots with the confidence of a man selling something he didn't own. "Those have to be the investors," Laura whispered, zooming in with her lens. "He's pitching the resort right now, on your land." Jonathan and Laura crept closer, staying hidden among the trees on his property. From their vantage point, they caught snippets of Carter's pitch. "Prime lakefront location," he said, his voice carrying over the breeze. "Exclusive access, full control of the waterfront. Just a few details to finalize." One of the investors, a woman in a sharp blazer, asked, "What about existing property owners?" Carter's reply was smooth but chilling. "Minimal issues. Most of the shoreline is undeveloped. There's one holdout we're negotiating with, but it's practically settled. We've managed the lake for years. Formal control is just a formality." Jonathan's grip on the binoculars tightened. Carter was lying through his teeth, painting a picture of ownership he didn't have and implying Jonathan was already on board. Laura snapped photos of the group, capturing Carter handing out glossy brochures with renderings of a sprawling resort complex, condos, a marina, a golf course, all planned for Sullivan Lake. "This is fraud," Laura muttered. "He's selling them a fantasy on your property." Jonathan's mind flashed to his grandfather, who'd fought off mining companies to protect this lake. The thought of Carter turning it into a playground for the rich made his stomach churn. But he stayed calm, channeling his grandfather's advice, think clearly, act decisively. They retreated to the cabin to finalize their strategy. The sounds of the tournament laughter, clinking glasses, and revving boat engines echoing across the water. Back at the cabin, Laura spread out her legal notes. "We've got enough to file an emergency injunction," she said. "Your deeds, the county records, the camera footage, it's overwhelming evidence of trespassing and misrepresentation. We can stop this tournament today and shut down their resort plans before they go further." Jonathan hesitated. He wanted to act, but he also wanted to expose the HOA's deception to the residents, not just the courts. "If we stop the tournament now, they'll scatter and cover their tracks," he said. "Let's let it play out, get every bit of evidence, and hit them when they least expect it." Laura grinned. "You're playing chess, not checkers. I like it." Their plan was set: document the tournament, file the injunction immediately after, and use the evidence to confront the HOA publicly. Jonathan also wanted to involve Claire Morgan, the reporter. He texted her an update, sharing just enough to keep her interested without revealing their full hand. Claire replied instantly. "This is getting juicy. I'll be there by noon with a photographer. Keep those cameras rolling." Jonathan felt a surge of confidence. The HOA thought they were untouchable, but they were about to learn who they were dealing with. As the tournament kicked into high gear, the East Shore buzzed with activity. Thomas Reed, the Elite Anglers Club president, strutted around in his logoed cap, directing operations like a general. Boats dotted the lake, their motors churning the water Jonathan's grandfather had worked so hard to keep pristine. Families gathered for the barbecue, kids running around with sodas, while adults mingled under the tents. To an outsider, it looked like a perfect community event. But to Jonathan, it was an invasion. Every boat, every tent, every step on his land was a violation, and his cameras were catching it all. Around noon, Claire Morgan arrived, her photographer in tow. She blended into the crowd, snapping discreet photos and chatting with residents to gauge their understanding of the lake's ownership. Jonathan and Laura watched from the deck, keeping their distance. "She's good," Laura said, impressed. "If anyone can get the residents talking, it's her." Claire's presence added another layer to their plan. She'd amplify the truth once they were ready to go public. But Jonathan's focus shifted when he noticed a familiar BMW pulling up near the tournament site. William Carter stepped out, now back in his navy blazer, his face tense as he scanned the crowd. He seemed to sense something was off, like a predator catching a whiff of danger. Carter's unease grew when he spotted Claire talking to a group of residents. He hurried over, his fake smile back in place, and tried to steer the conversation. Jonathan couldn't hear what was said, but Claire's confident posture suggested she wasn't buying Carter's charm. Laura nudged Jonathan. "He's rattled. He knows questions are being asked." Jonathan nodded, his resolve hardening. Carter's attempt to bribe him yesterday had failed, and now the man was scrambling to keep control. But Jonathan wasn't just fighting for his lake, he was fighting for the truth, for his grandfather's legacy, and for every resident who'd been lied to by the HOA. As the afternoon wore on, Jonathan and Laura reviewed the camera footage in the cabin. The clips were damning boats launching from his land, HOA staff directing traffic on his property, and Carter's pitch to the investors, complete with those glossy brochures. Laura drafted the emergency injunction, citing the Sullivan family's clear ownership and the HOA's ongoing trespassing. She sent it to a contact at the county court, requesting an expedited review. "Judge Harmon owes me a favor," she said with a wink. "We'll have this filed by end of day, and it'll be in effect before the tournament wraps." Jonathan felt a mix of anticipation and unease. He'd faced high-stakes situations before Hollywood auditions, public speaking, the pressure of portraying Jesus, but this was different. This was personal. The lake wasn't just property. It was his grandfather's dream, a place where Jonathan had learned to fish, to listen, to value what mattered. The thought of Carter and his cronies turning it into a luxury resort fueled his determination. But he also knew the fight was about to get uglier. Carter wasn't the type to back down easily, and the mention of a timeline suggested powerful players were involved. As the sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the lake, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cameras. He pulled up the live feed and saw two men in HOA vests near the dock, inspecting the area where his boat had been. One of them carried a clipboard, jotting notes, while the other gestured toward the cabin. Jonathan's heart sank. Were they planning another move? He showed the footage to Laura, who frowned. They're scoping out your property. They know you're not signing their agreement, and they're getting desperate. Jonathan's mind raced. He'd expected pushback, but this felt like a direct challenge, a sign the HOA was ready to escalate. Laura grabbed her laptop. We need to move faster. If they're poking around, they might try to destroy evidence or intimidate you further. She finalized the injunction paperwork and sent it off, promising Jonathan that the court would act swiftly. Meanwhile, Jonathan decided to take a walk around the lake, not to confront anyone, but to clear his head and check the camera placements. As he walked the shoreline, he thought of his grandfather's stories, how he'd stood up to a mining company, how he'd taught local kids to respect the lake. Jonathan felt a fire in his chest. This wasn't just about a boat or a lake. It was about standing up to greed, about protecting something pure in a world that too often valued profit over principle. By evening, the tournament was still in full swing, the laughter and music carrying across the water. Jonathan stood on the dock, watching the boats glide over his lake, each one a reminder of the HOA's arrogance. He knew the next day would be pivotal. The injunction would hit. The cameras would provide undeniable proof, and Claire's reporting would light the fuse. But as he looked out at the water, shimmering under the twilight, he couldn't shake the feeling that Carter and his allies were one step ahead, plotting their next move. Whatever it was, Jonathan was ready. He'd learned from his grandfather that some fights were worth having, and this one was just beginning. The sun hung low over Sullivan Lake, painting the water with streaks of orange and pink as the Elite Anglers Club's tournament reached its peak. From the cabin's deck, Jonathan Roumie watched the chaos unfold on his East Shore boats, crisscrossing his lake, tents packed with laughing residents, and the faint hum of music from the barbecue. His security cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of the HOA's brazen trespass. But Jonathan's focus wasn't on the revelry. His eyes were locked on William Carter, who was now huddled with Thomas Reed and Margaret Lane near the temporary dock, their faces tense. Something was brewing, and Jonathan could feel it. His phone buzzed with another motion alert from the cameras. A group of HOA staffers were creeping closer to his dock, poking around where his grandfather's boat had been stolen. Laura Bennett, standing beside him, glanced at the live feed and frowned. "They're up to something," she said. "We need to act before they pull another stunt." Jonathan nodded, his mind sharp despite the long day. He'd learned from his years in Hollywood navigating auditions, contracts, and high-stakes negotiations that timing was everything. They had the evidence camera footage of the boat theft, the tournament, and Carter's fraudulent pitch to investors. Laura's emergency injunction was filed, and Judge Harmon had promised a ruling by morning. But Jonathan knew they couldn't just wait. The HOA's desperation was palpable, and desperate people made bold moves. "We need to shake them up," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "Let's confront them at the tournament, but not with lawyers or papers just enough to make them squirm. Laura raised an eyebrow, a grin spreading across her face. You want to walk into the lion's den I'm in? Their plan was simple but daring. Jonathan would approach the tournament as a concerned neighbor, ask pointed questions in front of the crowd, and let Carter's own words dig his grave. Claire Morgan, the reporter, was already on site, blending in with her photographer, ready to capture the reaction. Jonathan grabbed his jacket, took a deep breath, and headed toward the east shore, Laura by his side. The lake's calm surface belied the storm about to break. As they approached the tournament, the crowd was in high spirits, oblivious to the legal battle brewing. Thomas Reed was handing out awards to early winners, his voice booming over a megaphone. Residents clapped, kids darted around with ice cream, and the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. Jonathan spotted Carter near the bar, still with the investors, his gestures animated as he pointed to a blueprint. The man was selling a dream built on lies, and Jonathan's resolve hardened. He stepped into the open, Laura trailing a few steps behind, and raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," he called, his tone polite but firm. "Can we talk about the lake for a minute?" The crowd quieted, heads turning. Carter froze, his smile faltering as he recognized Jonathan. "Mr. Roumie," he said, forcing his charm back into place. "This isn't the time. We're in the middle of a community event." Jonathan didn't back down, keeping his voice calm but loud enough for others to hear. "I just want to clarify something. You keep calling this community waters, but my family's owned Sullivan Lake since the 1950s. I've got the deeds to prove it. So why is the HOA hosting events here without permission?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Residents exchanged glances, some confused, others intrigued. Thomas Reed stepped forward, his face red. "This is our tournament, been running for years. You can't just show up and make trouble." Jonathan held his ground, his eyes locked on Carter. "I'm not making trouble. I'm asking why you're using my lake and telling investors you control it. That sounds like a problem to me." The investors, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, one of them whispering to another. Carter's composure cracked, his voice rising. "You're mistaken, Mr. Roumie. The HOA has managed this lake for decades. We have agreements in place." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his tone still even. "I'd love to see those agreements, because my deeds say otherwise. And so do the county records." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A woman in her 40s, holding a soda, spoke up. "Wait, are you saying the HOA doesn't own the lake? We've been paying fees for lake access?" Another resident chimed in, his voice sharp. "Yeah, my HOA dues are supposed to cover maintenance. What's going on here?" Carter's face paled, but he waved a hand dismissively. "This is a misunderstanding. We'll address it at the next board meeting." Laura stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Actually, Mr. Carter, it's more than a misunderstanding. We have evidence of trespassing, including footage of HOA staff removing Mr. Roumie's boat from his own dock. That's theft." The word theft hit like a thunderclap. Residents gasped, and the investors began gathering their things, clearly uneasy. Thomas Reed tried to salvage the situation, shouting over the growing unrest. "This is our lake. We've used it for years," but his words only fueled the confusion. A man in a fishing hat stepped forward, pointing at Carter. "If you don't own it, where's our money going?" Jonathan saw his opening. "I don't mind residents enjoying the lake," he said, addressing the crowd. "My grandfather let locals fish here for free, as long as they respected it. But the HOA's been lying to you, claiming authority they don't have. And now they're planning a resort on my land without my consent." The crowd erupted in questions, voices overlapping, Carter's face twisted with fury, but he couldn't stop the tide. Claire Morgan, standing nearby, scribbled furiously, her photographer snapping shots of the chaos. The investors were already heading to their cars, their trust in Carter visibly shaken. Carter pushed through the crowd, his voice low and venomous as he reached Jonathan. "You have no idea what you're doing. Roumie, I have connections you can't imagine. This isn't over." Jonathan met his gaze, unflinching. "Actually, I think it is. And if you're talking about fraud to investors, I've got that on camera too." Carter's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through his bravado. He stormed off, barking orders at Margaret Lane to handle this. The tournament began to unravel, with residents demanding answers and some packing up their gear in frustration. Jonathan and Laura returned to the cabin, adrenaline still pumping. Claire followed, her notebook filled with quotes. "That was bold," she said, grinning. "The residents are furious, and those investors looked ready to bolt. I've got enough for a story, but I'll wait for your signal to publish." Jonathan thanked her, knowing her article would be a game changer. Back inside, Laura checked her email and let out a triumphant laugh. "Judge Harmon just approved the injunction. It's effective immediately. We can shut down any unauthorized activity on the lake as of tonight." Jonathan felt a weight lift, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Carter's threat lingered, and the HOA's desperation could lead to reckless moves. Laura spread out their evidence on the table: camera footage, deeds, county records, and now photos from the tournament. "We've got them cornered," she said, "but we need to keep the pressure on. Tomorrow, we'll serve the injunction with a sheriff's deputy and make it clear this lake is yours." Jonathan nodded, his thoughts drifting to his grandfather. The old man had faced down bigger threats than this, and Jonathan was determined to do the same. As night fell, the tournament crowd thinned, the last boats trailing off the lake. Jonathan walked to the dock, the empty space where his boat once sat, a stark reminder of the HOA's arrogance. He thought of his grandfather, casting lines under these same stars, teaching him that some things were worth fighting for. The injunction was a victory, but Jonathan sensed Carter and his allies weren't done. The cameras picked up another alert, two figures moving near the east shore, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Were they tampering with evidence, planning retaliation? Whatever it was, he and Laura were ready to face it head-on, armed with truth and a legacy that wouldn't bend. The moon hung high over Sullivan Lake, casting a silver glow across the water as the last stragglers from the Elite Anglers Club's tournament packed up their gear. Jonathan Roumie stood on his dock, the empty space where his grandfather's boat once rested, a constant reminder of the HOA's audacity. The security cameras, still vigilant, had caught those late-night figures snooping near the east shore, their flashlights darting like fireflies. Jonathan's gut told him William Carter and his allies were planning something reckless, but he wasn't backing down. Inside the cabin, Laura Bennett was finalizing their strategy, her laptop glowing with the freshly approved court injunction. "We've got them on the ropes," she said, her voice brimming with confidence. "Tomorrow, we serve this injunction with a sheriff's deputy and shut their operation down for good." Jonathan nodded, but his mind was on the figures in the camera footage. "Those guys by the shore," he said, pointing at the screen. "They weren't just wandering. They were looking for something, maybe our cameras." Laura's eyes narrowed. "If they're tampering with evidence, that's another nail in their coffin. We'll check the footage at dawn and make sure everything's secure." Jonathan agreed, but the unease lingered. Carter's threat from earlier, "I have connections you can't imagine," echoed in his head. This wasn't just about a lake anymore. It was a battle against greed and lies, and Jonathan was ready to fight it like his grandfather would have. By morning, the lake was quiet, the chaos of the tournament replaced by an eerie calm. Jonathan and Laura met Sheriff's Deputy Mark Reynolds, a no-nonsense officer who'd been assigned to serve the injunction after Judge Harmon's swift approval. Reynolds, a burly man with a skeptical squint, reviewed the court order and nodded. "This is airtight," he said. "Let's go make it official." Jonathan felt a surge of anticipation. The injunction declared Sullivan Lake private property and barred all unauthorized access, effectively halting the HOA's activities. With Claire Morgan's reporting ready to amplify their case, they were poised to expose the HOA's deception to the world. The trio headed to the East Shore, where remnants of the tournament empty cups, stray wrappers, and tire tracks still littered Jonathan's land. Deputy Reynolds carried a stack of private property no trespassing signs, which Jonathan and Laura helped him post around the perimeter. Each sign was a declaration of ownership, a line in the sand. As they worked, a pickup truck roared up, and Thomas Reed leapt out, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is this?" he barked, pointing at the signs. "You can't shut down our lake." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "It's not your lake. Mr. Reed, it's mine. The court agrees." Laura handed Reed a copy of the injunction, her expression cool. "This is a court order. Mr. Reed, Sullivan Lake belongs to Mr. Roumie, and your club's been trespassing for years. You're ordered to vacate immediately." Reed's eyes darted to the document, his bravado faltering. "This is nonsense. We've run this tournament for 15 years. Deputy Reynolds cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The law's clear. Sir, this is private property. Pack up and leave, or I'll have to enforce it," Reed sputtered, but the weight of the injunction silenced him. He stormed back to his truck, muttering curses. As they finished posting the signs, William Carter arrived, his BMW screeching to a halt. He strode toward them, his usual polish replaced by barely contained fury. "You're making a huge mistake, Roumie," he snapped, ignoring the deputy. "This lake is a community asset. You're disrupting years of tradition." Jonathan met his gaze, unflinching. "Tradition doesn't give you the right to steal my property. Carter, you've been lying to residents and investors, and I've got proof." Carter's face twitched, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed. "This will cost you." Laura stepped in, holding up another copy of the injunction. "Actually, Mr. Carter, it's you who's in trouble. We have footage of your staff stealing Mr. Roumie's boat, and you pitching a resort on land you don't own. That's fraud." Carter's composure cracked further, his hands clenching. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Deputy Reynolds raised a hand. "Enough. This is a court order. Clear out, or we'll escalate." Carter glared at Jonathan, then spun on his heel and left, his car peeling out in a cloud of dust. The confrontation sent a ripple through Maple Creek Estates. By mid-morning, residents were gathering near the lake, drawn by rumors of the showdown. Claire Morgan was there, her photographer capturing the no trespassing signs and the tense exchange. She approached Jonathan, her notebook ready. "That was intense," she said. "The residents are buzzing, some are angry at the HOA, others are just confused. What's your next move?" Jonathan looked out at the lake, its surface glinting in the sunlight. "I want my boat back," he said simply, "and I want the truth out there. The HOA's been lying to these people, and they deserve to know." Claire nodded, scribbling. "I've got quotes from residents who thought their HOA fees covered lake access. They're starting to ask where that money went." Jonathan's eyes lit up. "That's the question. if they don't own the lake? What have they been doing with those fees? Laura chimed in. We're pushing for a county investigation into their finances. If they've been misusing funds, it's over for them. Claire grinned. This story's going to blow up. I'll hold off publishing until you give the green light, but it's ready to go viral. As the day progressed, Jonathan and Laura returned to the cabin to review their next steps. The injunction was a major win. But Carter's threats and the late-night activity on the cameras suggested the HOA wasn't done fighting. Jonathan pulled up the latest footage, his heart sinking as he watched. The two figures from the previous night had returned, this time tampering with one of the cameras near the east shore. One of them pried it loose, while the other scanned the area, clearly looking for more. "They're trying to cover their tracks," Laura said, her voice tight. "We need to secure the remaining cameras and back up all the footage." Jonathan acted fast, downloading every clip to a hard drive and sending copies to Laura's cloud storage. The tampered camera was a loss, but the others had captured enough boats, tents, Carter's investor pitch, and now this attempt to sabotage their evidence. Laura called a tech friend to enhance the footage, hoping to identify the culprits. If we can tie this to Carter or his inner circle, it's another charge against them, she said. Jonathan nodded, but his thoughts were on his grandfather. The old man had faced down threats with nothing but grit and principle, and Jonathan felt that same fire in his chest. He wasn't just protecting a lake, he was honoring a legacy. By afternoon, word of the injunction spread through Maple Creek Estates, and residents began showing up at the cabin, some curious, others angry. A woman named Susan Harper, a longtime resident, knocked on Jonathan's door. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The HOA told us the lake was ours. We've been paying thousands in fees for it." Jonathan invited her in, explaining the truth: the lake had always been his family's, and the HOA had no legal claim. Susan's face fell. "They lied to us," she said. "What else have they been hiding?" Jonathan handed her a copy of the deed, his tone gentle. "I don't mind sharing the lake with the community, but it has to be done right. The HOA's been taking advantage of everyone." Susan's visit was just the start. More residents arrived, their questions turning to outrage as they realized the HOA's deception. Jonathan listened, his calm presence diffusing their anger into determination. He thought of his grandfather, who'd let local kids fish for free, always believing the lake was a gift to be shared, not hoarded. But sharing didn't mean surrendering. And Jonathan wasn't about to let Carter's schemes destroy what his family had built. As dusk settled, Jonathan's phone buzzed with another alert. The cameras caught a new figure near the dock, this time alone, carrying what looked like a crowbar. Jonathan's pulse raced. Was this another attempt to sabotage his evidence, or something worse? He grabbed a flashlight and headed out. Laura close behind, her phone ready to call Deputy Reynolds if needed. The lake was quiet, but the air felt heavy with anticipation. Whatever the HOA was planning, Jonathan knew the next move would be critical. He wasn't just fighting for his grandfather's legacy anymore. He was fighting for truth, for justice, and for a community that deserved better. Jonathan Roumie's boots crunched against the gravel as he moved swiftly toward the dock, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the darkness. The night air was thick with tension. The only sounds the gentle lapping of Sullivan Lake and the distant chirping of crickets. Laura Bennett followed close behind, her phone ready to dial Deputy Reynolds if things went south. The security camera alert had shown a lone figure near the dock, clutching what looked like a crowbar, a clear sign the HOA was escalating their tactics. Jonathan's heart pounded, but he kept his focus sharp, channeling his grandfather's steely resolve. Whoever this was, they weren't going to intimidate him or sabotage his fight for the lake. As they neared the dock, Jonathan spotted the figure, a man in a dark jacket, crouched near one of the remaining cameras, tampering with its mount. "Hey," Jonathan called, his voice firm but controlled. The man froze, then bolted toward the trees, dropping the crowbar in his haste. Jonathan sprinted after him, but the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving only the clatter of the tool on the dock. Laura caught up, shining her phone's light on the scene. "Got a good look at him?" she asked, breathless. Jonathan shook his head. Too dark. But the camera might have caught his face. They inspected the device, still intact, but loosened. "They're desperate," Laura said, her voice tight. "They know we've got them cornered." "Back at the cabin?" Jonathan pulled up the camera footage. The grainy image showed the man's silhouette, but his face was obscured by a hood. Still, the HOA logo on his jacket was unmistakable. "This ties back to Carter," Jonathan said, his jaw clenched. Laura nodded, already backing up the clip to their cloud storage. "If we can ID him, it's another charge: vandalism, maybe even obstruction of justice." She paused, her eyes meeting Jonathan's. "But we need to be careful. If they're sending people out at night, they're not just covering tracks, they're fighting dirty." The next morning, Deputy Reynolds arrived to review the footage. His skeptical squint softened as he watched the clip. "That's a clear HOA logo," he said, jotting notes. "I'll run this by the station, see if we can match it to anyone. But I'm warning you, the HOA's got pull around here. Don't expect miracles." Jonathan nodded, his frustration tempered by determination. He wasn't relying on miracles, he was relying on the truth. Laura, meanwhile, was on the phone with her tech friend, who promised to enhance the footage for clearer details. "If we get a face," she told Jonathan, "we can tie this directly to Carter or his inner circle." As they waited for updates, residents of Maple Creek Estates continued to show up at the cabin, their numbers growing. Susan Harper, the woman who'd visited the day before, returned with a small group, their faces a mix of anger and confusion. "We had a neighborhood meeting last night," Susan said, her voice shaking. "People are furious. We've been paying thousands in HOA fees, thinking it covered lake access and maintenance. Now we hear the lake's yours. What's the HOA been doing with our money?" Jonathan invited them in, his calm presence easing their tension. He showed them the deeds, explaining how the HOA had misrepresented their authority for years. "My grandfather never minded locals fishing here," he said, "but the HOA's been lying to you. And now they're planning a resort on my land without my consent." The residents' outrage grew. "A man named Paul Carter, no relation to William, spoke up. They told us the lake was community property. I've been paying $600 a month in fees, and part of that was supposed to be for the lake. If they don't own it, where's the money going?" Jonathan exchanged a glance with Laura. "That's what we're trying to find out," he said. "We're pushing for a county investigation into their finances." The group buzzed with questions, some offering to help gather evidence from their own HOA records. Jonathan felt a spark of hope. The community was turning against the HOA, and their support could be a game changer. Claire Morgan called with an update, her voice electric with excitement. "The residents are blowing up my inbox," she said. "I've got dozens of emails from people saying they were misled about the lake. Some even found old HOA newsletters claiming they owned it outright. This story's going to be huge when it drops." Jonathan asked her to keep digging, especially into the resort investors. "Find out who's funding Carter's plan," he said. "If we can link them to his lies, it'll collapse his scheme." Claire agreed, promising to track down names and financial trails. By afternoon, the enhanced camera footage came back from Laura's tech friend. The image was sharper, revealing the man's face, a young HOA staffer named Ethan Blake, known to work closely with Margaret Lane. Laura grinned. "Got him. This ties the vandalism to the HOA's leadership." She drafted a formal complaint to the sheriff's office, attaching the footage and requesting an investigation into Blake's actions. Jonathan, meanwhile, took a walk to the dock, needing a moment to clear his head. The lake was serene, its surface reflecting the blue sky. But the fight was far from over. Carter's threats, the vandalism, the growing unrest. It all pointed to a bigger storm brewing. As Jonathan cast a line into the water, a habit that always calmed him. Henry Walsh's pickup truck rattled into the driveway. The old carpenter stepped out, his face grim. "Got news from my niece, Emily," he said, leaning against the dock railing. "The county planning department's fast-tracking the HOA's resort application. They're claiming community support and saying they've got verbal agreements from the lake's owner. Jonathan's stomach dropped. "That's a lie," he said, his voice low. "I never agreed to anything." Henry nodded. "I know, but they're pushing hard. Emily says there's big money behind this, investors from out of state. Carter's banking on bullying you into submission." The news hit Jonathan like a punch. The HOA wasn't just trespassing, they were forging claims to steamroll their resort plan. Laura joined them, her eyes blazing as she heard the update. "This is fraud on a whole new level," she said. "We need to hit them with everything we've got before they file more false documents." She suggested a two-pronged attack: serve the vandalism complaint to pressure the HOA and file a cease-and-desist letter against their resort application, citing the injunction and the forged claims. Jonathan agreed, but he wanted to go further. "Let's get the residents involved," he said. "They're angry. If they speak out, it'll show the county there's no community support for this." Laura drafted the cease-and-desist letter while Jonathan reached out to Susan Harper and Paul Carter, who were eager to rally the residents. They organized an impromptu meeting at Susan's house that evening, where a dozen neighbors gathered, their frustration boiling over. Jonathan spoke to them, his voice steady but passionate. "The HOA's been lying to you for years," he said. "They don't own the lake, and now they're trying to sell it to developers, but we can stop them together." The residents nodded, some volunteering to dig through HOA financial records, others offering to write letters to the county. Paul, a retired accountant, promised to analyze the HOA's budgets for discrepancies. As the meeting wrapped up, Jonathan felt a surge of momentum. The community was uniting, and the HOA's lies were unraveling, but his phone buzzed with another camera alert, pulling him back to reality. The live feed showed two figures near the east shore again, this time carrying what looked like spray paint cans. Jonathan's heart raced. Were they planning to deface his property? He grabbed his flashlight and called Laura, who was already dialing Deputy Reynolds. "They're not stopping," she said, her voice fierce. "But neither are we." Jonathan nodded, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. "Protect what's yours, but do it with truth." As he headed toward the shore, the lake's calm surface belied the battle raging around it. The HOA was fighting dirty, but Jonathan was ready to fight smarter. Jonathan Roumie's flashlight beams swept across the east shore of Sullivan Lake, catching the glint of spray paint cans abandoned in the grass. The two figures spotted on the security cameras had fled into the night, leaving behind evidence of their intent to deface his property. Laura Bennett, standing beside him, snapped photos of the cans, her face set with determination. "This is vandalism. Caught red-handed," she said, her voice sharp. "They're trying to scare you, Jonathan, but they just handed us more ammunition." Jonathan's pulse was still racing from the chase, but he nodded, his grandfather's words steadying him. Truth is stronger than fear. He wasn't about to let the HOA's dirty tricks derail his fight. As he and Laura returned to the cabin, Deputy Reynolds arrived, summoned by Laura's urgent call. The lake's calm surface reflected the stars, but the battle for its future was anything but peaceful. Reynolds examined the cans and the camera footage, his expression grim. "That's HOA gear," he said, pointing to the logo on one of the cans. And with the earlier footage of Ethan Blake tampering with your camera, this is starting to look like a pattern. Jonathan handed him the hard drive with all their backups. We've got everything: boat theft, trespassing, Carter's investor pitch, and now this, he said. Reynolds nodded, tucking the drive into his pocket. I'll take this to the station and push for an investigation. But Carter's got friends in high places. Don't expect this to go down easy. Jonathan met his gaze. I'm not expecting easy. I just want what's right. Back inside, Laura was already drafting a new complaint, adding vandalism to their growing list of charges against the HOA. We've got enough to bury them, she said, her fingers flying across her laptop. The cease and desist letter for the resort application is ready to go, and with the residents on our side, the county won't be able to ignore this. Jonathan felt a surge of momentum, but he knew the HOA wouldn't go quietly. William Carter's threats and the escalating sabotage suggested they were doubling down, desperate to protect their scheme. The question was, what would they try next? By morning, the lake was quiet, but Maple Creek Estates was buzzing with unrest. Residents, spurred by Susan Harper and Paul Carter, were spreading word of the HOA's deception. A group gathered outside the community center, demanding answers from the board. Jonathan and Laura drove over, invited by Susan to speak to the crowd. As they arrived, Claire Morgan was already there, her photographer snapping shots of the growing protest. This is getting big, Claire said, her eyes gleaming. I've got residents ready to go on record about the HOA's lies. And I dug up something else. Carter's resort investors are tied to a real estate firm out of Chicago. Big money. Shady reputation. Jonathan took in the crowd, about 50 residents, some holding homemade signs reading, "Where's our money?" and "HOA lies." Susan introduced him, her voice ringing with conviction. This is Jonathan Roumie, the rightful owner of Sullivan Lake. He's here to tell you the truth. Jonathan stepped forward, his heart steady despite the weight of their stares. My family's owned this lake since the 1950s, he said, his voice clear. My grandfather let locals fish here because he believed it was a gift to share, not to hoard. But the HOA's been lying to you, claiming they control the lake and charging you fees for something they don't own. Now they're trying to build a resort on my land without my consent. The crowd erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Paul Carter, the retired accountant, shouted, "We've been paying thousands for lake access. Where's that money?" Others joined in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of betrayal. Jonathan raised a hand, calming them. I don't want to keep the lake from you, he said, but we need to stop the HOA's lies and hold them accountable. Together, we can make this right. The residents cheered, their anger turning to resolve. Claire scribbled notes, whispering to Jonathan, "This is gold. When this story breaks, it's going to shake the whole county." As the crowd dispersed, Jonathan noticed Margaret Lane watching from the community center's steps, her face pale. She slipped inside, and Jonathan's gut told him she was reporting back to Carter. He and Laura returned to the cabin, where Laura finalized the cease and desist letter and sent it to the county planning department, demanding they reject the HOA's resort application based on their fraudulent claims. She also forwarded the vandalism evidence to Reynolds, pushing for immediate action. We're hitting them from every angle, she said. The county's under pressure now, and with the residents turning, Carter's running out of moves. But Carter wasn't done. That afternoon, a sleek black SUV pulled into Jonathan's driveway. Out stepped Stephen Hayes, the HOA's attorney, his face all business. "Mr. Roumie," he said, handing Jonathan a thick envelope. "This is a formal offer from the HOA to resolve this dispute. We're prepared to return your boat and waive all fines if you agree to negotiate lake access for community use." Jonathan skimmed the document. It was another attempt to get him to acknowledge the HOA's authority, dressed up as a peace offering. He handed it back, his voice calm but firm. "My lawyers already reviewed your claims. Mr. Hayes, you have no authority over my lake, and stealing my boat doesn't give you leverage." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. The HOA represents the community's interests, and we have significant support. Litigation will be costly for everyone." Jonathan didn't flinch. "I'm not the one lying to residents or pitching fake resorts to investors. If you want to talk costs, let's start with where those HOA fees have been going." Hayes stiffened, clearly caught off guard. He muttered something about reviewing options and left, his SUV speeding away. Jonathan called Laura, who laughed when he recounted the exchange. "They're scrambling," she said. "That offers a sign they know they're losing. But we need to stay sharp. Carter's not out of tricks." She was right. That evening, Jonathan's phone buzzed with another camera alert. The footage showed 3 figures near the east shore, this time carrying what looked like heavy tools, possibly to damage the new no trespassing signs or worse. Jonathan's heart sank. The HOA was getting bolder, and the timing of Hayes's visit felt too convenient. Were they trying to distract him while planning a bigger move? Jonathan and Laura decided to act. They called Deputy Reynolds, who agreed to send a patrol to the lake overnight to deter further vandalism. Jonathan also reached out to Paul Carter, who was digging into the HOA's financial records with a small group of residents. "We found something," Paul said over the phone, his voice tense. "The HOA's been funneling lake maintenance fees into an account tied to a shell company. We're still tracing it, but it looks shady." Jonathan's mind raced. If the HOA was misusing funds, it could be the key to dismantling their entire operation. As night fell, Jonathan walked to the dock, casting a line into the lake to clear his thoughts. The water was calm, but the stakes were higher than ever. His grandfather had taught him that protecting what mattered took patience and courage. And Jonathan felt both coursing through him. The HOA's lies were crumbling, the residents were rallying, and Claire's story was ready to explode. But the figures on the camera footage and Carter's relentless scheming were a reminder that the fight was far from over. Jonathan reeled in his line, his eyes scanning the dark shoreline. Whatever the HOA was planning next, he was ready to meet it head-on, with truth as his weapon and his grandfather's legacy as his guide. Jonathan Roumie stood at the edge of Sullivan Lake, the early morning mist curling over the water as he watched a sheriff's patrol boat glide across the surface. Deputy Reynolds had kept his promise, stationing officers to guard the lake overnight after the latest camera alert showed 3 figures with tools near the east shore. The no trespassing signs still stood, untouched. But Jonathan's gut told him the HOA wasn't done. Their escalating tactics, stealing his boat, tampering with cameras, and now creeping around with what looked like heavy tools, pointed to desperation. Inside the cabin, Laura Bennett was on her laptop, finalizing the cease and desist letter to the county planning department, her eyes blazing with focus. "We're closing in," she said. "The vandalism, the shell company, Carter's lies to investors, it's all coming together. They can't hide much longer." Jonathan nodded, but his thoughts were on the lake, its calm belying the storm brewing around it. His grandfather had fought off threats to this place with nothing but grit, and Jonathan felt that same fire. The residents' support, Claire Morgan's reporting, and the mounting evidence were shifting the tide, but William Carter's connections made him a dangerous opponent. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Paul Carter, the retired accountant resident who'd been digging into the HOA's finances. Found something big. The message read, "Meet me at Susan's house ASAP." Jonathan showed it to Laura, who grabbed her keys. "Let's go. If Paul's got dirt, we need it now." They arrived at Susan Harper's modest home, where a small group of residents waited, their faces a mix of anger and determination. Paul, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, spread out a stack of HOA financial records on the dining table. "I've been cross-referencing their budgets," he said, his voice steady but urgent. The lake maintenance fees, thousands of dollars a year, were funneled into an account tied to a company called Blue Horizon Properties. It's a shell corporation. No real office, just a P.O. box in Chicago. And guess who's listed as a director? Margaret Lane. The room erupted in gasps. Susan Harper's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret, the HOA vice president, Paul nodded, pointing to a document. "Her name's on the incorporation papers, buried under layers of paperwork. I'd bet my pension William Carter's involved too, but he's covered his tracks better." Jonathan's mind raced. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was fraud, siphoning residents' money into a fake company while the HOA pretended to control the lake. Laura leaned over the documents, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. "This is dynamite," she said. "If we can tie Blue Horizon to the resort plan, it's game over for Carter and Lane." Jonathan addressed the group, his voice calm but resolute. "You've all been lied to for years, paying for a lake the HOA doesn't own. Now they're trying to sell it to developers, using your money to fund their scheme. We're fighting back, but we need your help. Keep digging, keep talking to Claire Morgan, and let the county know you don't support this resort." The residents nodded, their anger turning to purpose. Susan spoke up. "We're with you. Jonathan, my family's been fishing here since I was a kid. Your grandfather never turned us away. We won't let Carter ruin this lake." As they left Susan's, Jonathan felt a surge of hope. The community was rallying, and Paul's discovery was a major blow to the HOA. But back at the cabin, a new email from Claire Morgan shifted the mood. "Got a lead on the investors," she wrote. "Blue Horizon Properties is linked to a Chicago real estate tycoon, Victor Grayson, who's bankrolling Carter's resort. Grayson's got a history of shady land deals, bulldozing local opposition to get what he wants. Be careful." Jonathan's stomach tightened. Carter wasn't just a local bully. He had powerful allies who played dirty. Laura read the email and cursed under her breath. Grayson's bad news. If he's involved, Carter's got more than just county connections. We need to move fast, serve the cease and desist, push the vandalism complaint, and get Claire's story out before Grayson's team can counter. Jonathan agreed, but he wanted to check the lake first. The overnight patrol had deterred further sabotage, but he didn't trust Carter to stop. He and Laura walked the shoreline, inspecting the cameras and signs. Most were intact, but one camera near the east shore was missing. Its mount snapped clean off. "They're not giving up," Jonathan said, his voice low. "They know we're closing in." That afternoon, Deputy Reynolds called with an update. "We ID'd one of the guys from last night's footage." He said, "It's Ethan Blake again, the same kid who tampered with your camera before. He's a low-level HOA staffer, probably acting on orders. We're bringing him in for questioning." Jonathan's eyes lit up. "Can you tie him to Carter?" or Lane Reynolds hesitated. "Not yet, but we're working on it. Blake's scared might crack if we lean on him." Laura jumped in, her voice firm. "Lean hard. Deputy, we've got evidence of fraud, theft, and vandalism. This isn't just a property dispute anymore." The news of Blake's questioning spread through Maple Creek Estates, fueling the residents' outrage. By evening, a crowd gathered outside the HOA's community center, demanding a meeting with the board. Jonathan and Laura arrived to find William Carter and Margaret Lane on the steps, trying to calm the mob. Carter's usual swagger was gone, his face pale as he raised his hands. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice strained. "We're working to resolve everything." But the residents weren't buying it. Paul Carter stepped forward, holding up copies of the Blue Horizon documents. "You've been stealing our money," he shouted. "Where's it going to your resort scam?" The crowd roared, and Lane shrank back, her eyes darting nervously. Jonathan stayed at the edge of the crowd, watching Carter squirm. He didn't need to speak. The residents were doing the talking for him. Claire Morgan was there, her photographer capturing every moment. She pulled Jonathan aside, her voice low. "I'm ready to publish tomorrow unless you say otherwise. This story's going to hit like a bomb. Residents, fraud, Grayson's involvement, all of it." Jonathan nodded. "Hold off until we serve the cease and desist. We want Carter to feel the walls closing in." Claire grinned. "You're playing this smart? I like it." As the crowd dispersed, Jonathan and Laura returned to the cabin, their adrenaline still high. Laura sent the cease and desist letter to the county, attaching Paul's financial findings and the vandalism evidence. She also drafted a public letter from Jonathan to the residents, outlining the HOA's lies and inviting them to join a community effort to protect the lake. "We're not just fighting for you," Laura said, reading over the letter. "We're giving them a chance to fight for themselves." Jonathan nodded, his thoughts drifting to his grandfather. The old man had always said the lake was for everyone who respected it, and Jonathan was determined to honor that vision. But as night fell, another camera alert lit up Jonathan's phone. The footage showed a single figure near the dock, this time holding what looked like a gas can. Jonathan's heart stopped. Arson. Were they that desperate? He grabbed his flashlight and called Laura, who was already dialing Reynolds. "They're crossing a line," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "We need to stop them now." Jonathan headed toward the dock, his grandfather's words ringing in his ears. "Protect what's yours, but do it with truth." The lake was still, but danger was closing in, and Jonathan knew the next move could change everything. Jonathan Roumie's flashlight pierced the darkness as he sprinted toward Sullivan Lake's dock. The image of the gas can on the security camera seared into his mind. The night was still, but the threat of arson sent a chill through him. Laura Bennett was right behind. Her phone pressed to her ear as she relayed the situation to Deputy Reynolds. "We've got a potential arsonist on the property," she said, her voice urgent but controlled. "Send backup now." Jonathan's heart hammered, but he kept his focus, his grandfather's words steadying him. "Protect what's yours, but do it with truth." The figure was still at the dock, hunched over, unaware of their approach. Jonathan called out, his voice cutting through the silence. "Drop it and step back." The figure jolted, the gas can clattering to the wooden planks as he stumbled backward, then bolted into the trees. Jonathan gave chase, but the man was fast, disappearing into the dense forest. Laura caught up, shining her light on the abandoned can, its HOA logo gleaming in the beam. "Another one of Carter's goons," she said, snapping photos for evidence. "This is getting out of hand." Jonathan's jaw tightened. The HOA's escalation from theft to vandalism to now this showed how desperate they were to protect their resort scheme. As they secured the can and checked the dock for damage, headlights swept across the shore. Deputy Reynolds arrived with 2 officers, their radios crackling. "You okay?" Reynolds asked, scanning the scene. Jonathan nodded. "Caught him on camera. He dropped this before he ran." Reynolds bagged the can, his face grim. "This is serious. I'll have the station analyze it for prints. If it's tied to the HOA, they're in deep." Back at the cabin, Jonathan and Laura reviewed the footage. The figure's face was hidden, but the HOA logo on the can and his jacket matched earlier clips of Ethan Blake. "It's got to be him again," Laura said, her voice tense. "Carter's using him to do the dirty work." She sent the footage to Reynolds, adding it to their growing case file: boat theft, trespassing, vandalism, and now attempted arson. Jonathan felt a mix of anger and resolve. The HOA was unraveling, but their desperation made them dangerous. "We need to end this," he said. "The residents, Claire's story, the county investigation, let's hit them with everything." By morning, Claire Morgan's article hit the local newspaper's front page, a bombshell titled "HOA Deception Lies, Fraud, and a Stolen Lake." It detailed the Sullivan family's ownership, the HOA's years of trespassing, the Blue Horizon Shell Company, and Carter's fraudulent resort pitch. Claire included quotes from residents like Susan Harper and Paul Carter, who exposed the HOA's misused fees. The story spread like wildfire, picked up by regional news outlets and shared across social media. Maple Creek Estates was in an uproar, with residents flooding the community center, demanding the board's resignation. Jonathan and Laura watched the chaos unfold from the cabin, the weight of their victory sinking in. But the fight wasn't over. Deputy Reynolds called with an update. "We got prints off the gas can," he said. "They match Ethan Blake. He's in custody, and talking says Margaret Lane ordered him to send a message to you. We're bringing her in for questioning." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Lane's behind the arson attempt." Reynolds grunted. "Looks like it. Blake's scared, spilling everything. Claims Lane and Carter were planning to scare you into selling the lake." Laura pumped her fist. "This is it. If we tie Lane to Carter and Blue Horizon, their whole operation collapses." The county planning department responded to Laura's cease and desist letter, halting the HOA's resort application pending a full review. Paul Carter's financial findings, now public thanks to Claire's article, prompted the county to launch an official investigation into the HOA's finances. Residents were digging through their own records, uncovering more discrepancies, unexplained expenses, missing maintenance reports, and payments to Blue Horizon dating back years. Susan Harper visited Jonathan, her face a mix of relief and anger. "We trusted them," she said. "They took our money and lied about this lake. What do we do now?" Jonathan looked out at the lake, its surface glinting in the morning sun. "We take it back," he said. "Not just for me, but for everyone who loves this place. My grandfather wanted it to be a gift, not a commodity." He proposed a community meeting to discuss a new way forward, a system where residents could use the lake fairly, with rules that respected his ownership and protected the environment. Susan nodded, her eyes bright. "Your grandfather would be proud. Let's make it happen." That afternoon, Jonathan and Laura met with Claire at the diner, away from the chaos of Maple Creek Estates. Claire was buzzing with excitement. "The story's gone national," she said. "People are calling it a David and Goliath fight, local guy versus corrupt HOA. And I've got a lead on Victor Grayson, the Chicago tycoon. He's distancing himself from Carter, claiming he was misled about the lake's ownership." Jonathan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Grayson's cutting ties, Carter's losing his biggest backer." Laura nodded. "With Lane in custody and Grayson bailing, Carter's alone. But he won't go down without a fight." As if on cue, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He answered, and William Carter's voice came through, low and venomous. "You think you've won? Roumie. You're playing a dangerous game. My investors may be spooked, but I'm not done." Jonathan kept his tone steady. "You're done lying. Carter, your own people are turning on you, and the county's digging into your accounts. Keep pushing, and you'll bury yourself." Carter laughed. A hollow sound. "You'll regret this." The line went dead, leaving Jonathan with a chill. Laura overheard and frowned. "He's cornered, which makes him unpredictable. We need to stay one step ahead." She suggested beefing up security around the lake, expecting more sabotage attempts. Jonathan agreed, arranging for private security to patrol alongside the sheriff's deputies. He also asked Paul and Susan to organize the community meeting, set for the next evening, to propose a new framework for lake access. The idea was simple: a conservation trust to manage responsible use, with fees going to environmental protection, not a shell company's pockets. As night fell, Jonathan walked to the dock, casting a line into the lake to steady his nerves. The water was calm, but Carter's threat hung heavy. The cameras buzzed with another alert, showing a lone vehicle parked near the east shore, its headlights off. Jonathan's heart raced. Was Carter making good on his threat already? He grabbed his flashlight and called Laura, who was ready to alert Reynolds. The lake's serene beauty masked the danger closing in. But Jonathan was prepared. His grandfather had taught him to fight for what mattered, and he wasn't about to let Carter or anyone else steal Sullivan Lake's future. Jonathan Roumie stood frozen on the dock of Sullivan Lake, his flashlight beam locked on the dark vehicle parked near the east shore, its headlights off but engine still running. The security camera alert had come just minutes ago, and the sight of it combined with William Carter's chilling phone threat set Jonathan's nerves on edge. Laura Bennett, standing beside him, whispered, "That's no random car. Carter's making a move." She was already dialing Deputy Reynolds, her voice low but urgent. "Mark, we've got a suspicious vehicle on the lake's east shore. Get here fast." Jonathan's heart pounded, but he channeled his grandfather's grit, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The lake's serene surface reflected the moonlight, but danger was closing in, and Jonathan knew this moment could decide everything. As they waited for Reynolds, Jonathan crept closer to the vehicle, staying low among the trees. The car door opened, and a figure stepped out, William Carter himself, alone, carrying a small bag. Jonathan's breath caught. Was Carter here to destroy evidence, or worse, before he could act? Reynolds' patrol car roared up, lights flashing. Carter froze, then bolted toward the trees, dropping the bag. Reynolds and another officer gave chase, tackling Carter to the ground. Jonathan and Laura rushed forward as Reynolds cuffed him. "What's in the bag?" Carter Reynolds demanded, opening it to reveal documents, a hard drive, and a lighter. Planning to burn something, Carter's face was ashen, his usual arrogance gone. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Back at the cabin, Reynolds examined the bag's contents. The documents were internal HOA memos, detailing the Blue Horizon Shell Company and payments tied to the resort plan. The hard drive contained emails between Carter, Margaret Lane, and Victor Grayson, outlining their scheme to claim Sullivan Lake. "This is a gold mine," Laura said, her eyes wide. "Fraud, conspiracy, and now attempted destruction of evidence. Carter's done." Reynolds nodded, his skepticism replaced by resolve. "We've got Lane in custody. Blake's talking, and now this. The county prosecutor's taking over. Carter's looking at serious charges." The next morning, Claire Morgan's story exploded across national news, detailing the HOA's fraud, Carter's arrest, and the community's fight for justice. Residents of Maple Creek Estates flooded the community center, their anger turning to action. Susan Harper and Paul Carter led a vote to dissolve the current HOA board, electing new leadership, including Paul as interim president. Jonathan attended the meeting, watching as residents rallied around a new vision for their community, one built on transparency and respect. Susan approached him, her eyes bright. "We owe you, Jonathan. Your grandfather would be proud. He always shared this lake with us." Jonathan proposed the Sullivan Lake Conservation Trust, a non-profit to manage responsible lake access while protecting its environment. Residents would pay modest fees, with funds going to conservation, not profit. The crowd cheered, and Paul shook Jonathan's hand. "This is how it should have been," he said. "Honest, fair, and for the community." Jonathan smiled, thinking of his grandfather's words. The lake's a gift, not a commodity. The trust would ensure that legacy endured. Days later, Jonathan's boat was returned, delivered to the dock with a grudging apology from the new HOA leadership. Deputy Reynolds confirmed that Carter and Lane faced charges of fraud, theft, and conspiracy, with Victor Grayson under investigation for his role. The resort plan was dead, the county rejecting it outright. Claire's reporting uncovered Carter's past as a disgraced real estate broker in Florida, where he'd pulled similar schemes under a different name. He'd fled town after his arrest, but the law was closing in. Jonathan stood on the new public pier, built on the East Shore as part of the Conservation Trust. A plaque honored his grandfather Sullivan Lake, a gift for all who respect it. Families fished nearby, kids laughing as they cast lines, just as Jonathan had done as a boy. Henry Walsh joined him, his weathered face creased with a grin. "Your grandfather would have loved this," he said, handing Jonathan a fishing rod. "Bet you can't catch a bigger bass than me." Jonathan laughed, casting his line. The lake was alive again, its waters clear, its wildlife thriving, a testament to what truth and community could achieve. As Jonathan reeled in a fish, Laura stopped by, her legal work on the trust complete. "You did it," she said, smiling. "Not just saved the lake, but built something better." Jonathan looked out at the water, the weight of the fight lifting. The HOA's lies were gone, replaced by a community that valued honesty and stewardship. Carter's schemes had crumbled, and Sullivan Lake was free. Jonathan thought of his grandfather, picturing him on this same dock, rod in hand, smiling under the sun. The fight had been worth it, not just to protect what was his, but to show others a better way forward.